They're back. Multiple hostiles.
I see them. Damn. Okay, we've got all we're going to get. Go to stage 2, 47. Eliminate Reynard, and preferably without raising suspicion. One step ahead of the Shadow Client for once. Let's keep it that way.
Of the many different playstyles, genres, and subgenres that have emerged in gaming over the many years, lots of them have either morphed into something else or gone away entirely. Turn-based RPGs have largely turned towards being more real-time action RPGs. The point-and-click adventures of the days of Myst and Riven have largely become more interactive first-person adventures like Gone Home. And horror games became horror action, then became horror again. Obviously, there will always be niche indie games that are exceptions, but I'm referring to the mainstream here. Likewise, the stealth genre, which used to see new iterations roughly every 5 seconds, seems to have almost totally vanished in recent years. It wasn't too long ago when every studio wanted in on the idea of sneaking around enemies in games and accomplishing objectives without being spotted. Spy thrillers, espionage, and free-form, open-ended sandboxes that put the responsibility of getting from point A to B undetected squarely on your shoulders were a huge deal. Yet now, you'd be hard-pressed to find more than a small handful of games totally dedicated to this idea, in the way that they were just one console generation ago. But why is this? What the hell happened to stealth games? While it might be instinctive to go back to Metal Gear Solid or Tenchu as the harbinger of stealth as a video game genre, the truth is, getting around without detecting enemies and sneaking through various situations is an idea much older than those games. As long as the core tenets of what makes a stealth game are to avoid all or most combat, minimizing or eliminating alerting enemy PCs, and taking out adversaries from the shadows and or behind their fields of vision, then this genre is much older than you might think. It's tough to say exactly who invented stealth as a game genre, as the definitions of what make a stealth game are somewhat up to interpretation. But as a mechanic, it certainly has been present since at least the mid-1980s with games like Castle Wolfenstein, which, at points, task the player to disguise themselves as enemies to get past certain areas undetected. The next game, beyond Castle Wolfenstein, elaborated on this even further by letting you actually pull off real stealth kills from behind. And in that era, we also have the original Metal Gear games, which added even more nuance to the idea of sneaking around, as well as countless other games in the arcade and in-home consoles that pursued these ideas in their own ways. The concept was not nearly as standardized as we know it now, with noise-making items to draw enemies away, tall grass to hide in, and an endless supply of suspiciously convenient waist-high barriers for you to get behind and stay out of sight. Despite being a concept that people enjoyed long before the 90s, it was games like Thief: The Dark Project, Tenchu: Stealth Assassins, and Metal Gear Solid that popularized it into the massive genre we know it as today, that has spawned countless fans and inspired countless other great games to follow in their footsteps. While all of those games would live on famously with sequels and reboots, others like the Hitman games, the Sly Cooper games, and Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell series would also rise up and take the genre into their very distinct directions in the early 2000s. While Hitman would polish what its three-dimensional predecessors did before it with tight cornering, disguises, and tactical planning, Sly Cooper would simplify it to keep it fun, forgiving, and easy. Lots of other games would take one of these two approaches with varying degrees of success. As Metal Gear and Tenchu would continue to iterate on their formulas, games like Hitman and Sly did the same. The genre was growing so rapidly at this time that even franchises that weren't really known as stealth-focused experiences would introduce it as a mechanic in later sequels, while the addition of the mechanic into these already established franchises did breathe some new life into them in the short term, and perhaps scored them some extra points with reviewers of the time, it also muddied up those games' identities and led them to feel like they lost their way later on. Stealth was certainly popular, but perhaps jamming it into a series that had not been built around it previously wasn't the greatest idea. Nevertheless, many could say that the genre peaked with the Splinter Cell series.
Why did you torture Morgan Holt?
Lacerda told us to.
Why? What does he want to know?
Math problems. Programmer stuff. I don't get it.
You're just the stupid one who likes to hurt people, huh?
Exactly.
Can you think of a reason why the world wouldn't be a better place without you?
Please. I
didn't think so.
While there will always be disagreement on what game's stealth mechanics were the most fun, there is little debate around whose is the most detailed and technical. The Splinter Cell games would experiment with darkness, sound, positioning of the character's body, and hiding places in ways that nobody else could touch at the time. For the most part, Splinter Cell games didn't want stealth to be an option. They really wanted you to master it and use it to advance. While you could say that about the other games mentioned, you could still conceivably get through most of those games without using stealth. Sure, you would definitely have a harder time and probably break the tone of the experience. But outside of a handful of orchestrated stealth mandatory segments, no game before Splinter Cell really made stealth such a core element of its existence. While the late 2000s might be considered a high point for the genre, it also led to a point of great decline. By that time, the party of everybody experimenting with stealth as a genre was mostly over, and the few games that were doing it best rose to the top. If you were a die-hard stealth fan by this time, you knew which games did it best and which did not. The small handful of games that were the best stayed on top, and pretty much everyone else dropped off and went back to what they were doing before or moved on to the next big thing, open-world games. But that's a topic for another day. After the standardization of what players expected from stealth games became apparent, it was pretty clear that all developers either needed to meet that standard or just stay out of the genre altogether, as the risk of getting dinged for not meeting the standard could mean a flop of a game and a closing of the studio. Despite the contraction of the stealth scene, the demand for the fun, satisfying stealth games hadn't gone anywhere. A few franchises came up and took stabs at it, like 2012's Dishonored, but what seemed to really be developing for the genre was the idea, the concept of stealth, just being shoved into other games as a fleshed-out option. The Wolfenstein reboot, Killzone, all incorporated reasonably good stealth elements into their campaigns. Some of these were just options that players could ignore and go in guns blazing, but some of them were context-driven and mandatory. This seemed to work better and more often than a game totally devoting itself to the idea of stealth as a genre, thus putting itself into a corner as a stealth game. Stealth requires patience, planning, and can feel like work if it's not done right. And this is likely the reason why, that after the dust settled, many grew wary of the gameplay style. While the stealth genre is still technically alive and well today in the indie space, and with plenty of smaller experimental titles, it is still true that it just doesn't exist anywhere near as robustly as it once did. It seems as if having stealth as one of the many elements in a more well-rounded game is the trend that is taking hold now. Horizon Zero Dawn, Days Gone, and The Witcher 3 are all great examples of this being handled well. Stealth fans can get their kicks in these games, while those who don't care for stealth can largely ignore it, and both types of players can enjoy the game. That seems like a pretty reasonable compromise, I suppose. But it's also important to remember that great games that have put their own spin on stealth are still squeezing through every now and then, like Alien Isolation, A Plague Tale: Innocence, and even Untitled Goose Game. Perhaps and hopefully so, through these modern, innovative takes on stealth, we may see this hidden genre emerge from the shadows of niche gaming once again, or at least stay alive enough for us to enjoy a good one every once in a while. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you'll be notified when new videos go up.